Hi everyone, it's Michelle from Country Morning Creations, back with an answer to several questions I've received about coffee dyeing and acid neutralizing papers. There's a whole lot that goes into it. It's more than just handing you a recipe and saying, here's my recipe, use my recipe. Because there are a lot of different factors that go into it, and it's all about neutralizing the acid. If you've ever looked at like scrapbooking paper, it all says acid neutral on it. And that is because acid is going to eat away at the inks that you use. If you put any photographs in there, it will eat away at those photographs. It's what gives paper that fabulous grungy feel, especially around the edges. So papers that have actually aged generally have a lot of acid in them. Some paper, when it's made, even comes on the more acidic side. So when I came up with my recipe, I had gotten some pH strips. Those are things, I bought mine off of Amazon. I have since thrown them away. I don't even know why I did that, because it is a good idea to hang on to them, because you do want to test periodically to make sure you are coming up with an acid neutral mixture. The other thing is you don't want to be too far the other way on the pH scale. That's just as bad. So what we're trying to go for is that acid neutral, and on a pH strip it's right about the 7 number, and you'll see there's colors and it comes with all this great stuff. So to talk about that, I'm going to show you basically how I get my coffee to be this color. So if you want it darker, you're going to have to adjust all the recipe amounts, and if you like it lighter, you're going to again have to adjust recipe amounts. So let's talk about the paper first. The paper is going to be one of your most critical things. You need to start with paper that is acid-free. So Hammer Mill, all of their papers are acid-free. And if you flip this over, you can see right here, it says acid-free. So you need to start with an acid-free paper. That's something a lot of people don't do. They just grab whatever cheap paper they can grab from Walmart or whatever. You need to start with an acid-free paper. That part is really critical. So the recipe that I came up with was a lot of trial and error, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a batch. I usually only make about enough for a 1-quart mason jar, and I'll go ahead and make a batch and show you kind of how this works for me. So I know that with this coffee and this baking soda, and to get those colors, I need these amounts. I highly recommend you get pH test strips though, because if you're not going to create an actual recipe that you're going to use consistently every time, you will need to test every batch to make sure you're getting it consistent. So I knew that I wanted to start with, I like that color and I love how that works. So I start with about a half a cup of coffee. Let's see if I can get all of this in here. Yeah, I got most of it in. And then through trial and error and hit the camera. Through trial and error and testing, I found out that in order to neutralize this amount of this coffee, I needed a half teaspoon of baking soda. Now, again, depending on the coffee and stuff that you're using, so I just use good old Arm & Hammer. This stuff is dirt cheap, and it will last forever. But I just add a half teaspoon to this. And then if you've ever done baking soda and vinegar, you'll see that this is going to foam. So I do about a cup of hot water. That's where I start. And I just add the hot water so everything mixes, and see how foamy that is? That's beautiful and foamy, and I almost wish you could smell this, because this smells actually really good. But I let it just foam for a little bit, and you can see that it's just all foamy and everything. What's happening, and that foam is caused by the baking soda neutralizing the acid in the coffee. All coffees and teas are acidic. If you're using real, just regular tea, it's going to be acidic. Now, I do like to just add some water to this. You can see that on the top here, I have some chunks that have not quite dissolved yet. So one of the things I love to do is, while those are still undissolved, I like to go ahead and start coffee dyeing, dipping my papers. I use the just air dry method. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this up a little bit better. I use the air dry method, but a lot of people bake it, but I love how I get all these gorgeous speckles when I do that. So see how that's really gotten foamy again? So that is still just the acid being neutralized in there. And so I recommend that you wait until it's done. And then I just add 3 more cups of cold water to it. And that is kind of my coffee brew, if you will, of acid neutral coffee. So I do have a recipe that I use over and over again, acid neutral coffee dye. This is my recipe. People have asked me to share this recipe, but here's the problem. The reason you don't need, that's what I use to get that color paper in a perfect world. So I highly recommend that if you are going to try to acid neutralize your paper, you need to start out with your acid neutral paper. You need to figure out how dark you want your papers to be. I personally love this color, and it just comes out beautiful and crunchy. So I have consistency across the board when I'm making journals. All mine are this color. And then I have a recipe that I use that I make this with. So that should be acid neutralizing everything. So without the pH test strips, you're not going to get a good acid neutral coffee. I cannot emphasize that enough. You really need to get your pH test strips to make sure you're actually neutralizing the acid in the coffee that you use. So I hope this was really helpful and informational. This is how I make my concoction for my coffee dyed papers. Again, get those pH test strips, baking soda, coffee, acid neutral paper. Those are all the things you'll need to create papers that will last a long time, won't eat the ink off of your pages, and won't need any pictures or anything, embellishments that you put in your journals. I've actually heard of people who a year later, after coffee dyeing paper, went back and got out a journal and literally all the ink was gone. So we don't want to lose all those precious memories that we're writing down in our journals, right? So you need to make sure when you're making your journals that you're using acid neutral paper. I know I'm repeating myself again. One more time. This is so important. Acid neutral paper, neutralizing your coffee, and using pH test strips, because if you go lighter or darker, you need to use those test strips to make sure you're still in that acid neutral range. All right, well, I hope this was helpful, and I hope I've encouraged you to be creative today. Bye.